Appreciate that. So my name is Associate Professor Stephen Bird. I'd like to welcome you to this particular session, which is entitled Psychological Strategies for Success in Youth Athletes Today. What we'll do before we get going is just have a quick breakdown of the session. So in this session, we're going to unpack one specific principle from behavioural psychology and explore 4 specific ways you can assist your athletes in what we're going to call today quieting the inner critic. That will be the theme of this particular presentation. I want to thank the committee though, firstly. So Roger for the invitation and Michael for setting everything up. I also want to thank the co-speakers, so Anita and Mick for the insightful sessions. Anita, a great slide on train the brain, and Mick, just then your take-home points were most pertinent to what we're doing. But we've been in the chair for a bit, so before we get going, I just want to make sure that everyone's still with us and you're still online. So in your reactions button down the bottom, just give me a quick thumbs up so I can see everyone's still alive out there in the online world. Once you've done that, thanks Anita, appreciate that. See all these thumbs up coming in thick and fast. Great work. Excellent. Righto. Let's move along. So what I'd like to do though is I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I extend respect to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in the audience with us today. What are we going to talk about? Well, we're going to talk about 4 key strategies, and we're going to explore these strategies in relation to the practical use, such as goal setting, visualization, anchoring, and mindfulness. So let's get started. But before we do get started though, it's really important for us to take a time to reflect and understand the context, because the context in which we utilize these strategies is going to differ from sport to sport and from athlete to athlete, because context matters. Now, context today will provide examples to you from 2 sporting environments. And this will allow us to reflect on some of the unique circumstances we face as coaches today working with youth athletes of today. So the 2 contexts that we're going to touch on, one is going to be from a recently published book, and we're going to outline some concepts from When Winning Matters, a book that I've recently co-authored with international basketball coach, Rob Beveridge. Now, specifically within the book, our goal is to highlight some of the areas from the game plan, touch briefly on culture, 1%ers that count. That is where we're going to look at specifically in relation to some of the psychological strategies to help us quiet the inner critic. Secondly, we're going to look at the context from our work within the Western Region Academy of Sport. I was fortunate enough to work at RAS for a period of over 10 years as the Director of Strength and Conditioning. Now, those that may be unfamiliar with RAS, what's unique about the academy settings is RAS occupies a geographical location of more than 91,000 square kilometres, services around 125 pre-elite youth athletes at various stages within their athlete development journey. So we're going to use these 2 contexts to provide some background as we explore psychological strategies for youth athletes today. Now, when we look at that, what we do know from the literature is that in youth athletes, the perceptions of groupness, so this degree to which a collection of individuals is perceived to be a group, has been found to improve social identity within youth athletes, the feeling of belonging and being within a group itself. Now, youth athletes who felt they were members of a team exhibited a high degree of groupness, were more likely to perceive close ties, derive positive emotions, and indicate their importance. So here, we're now trying to link this area of perception is reality. So these athletes perceive this level of groupness and they feel like they're part of a community. But my question to you today really revolves around that perception is sometimes not always reality. Being comfortable in uncomfortable situations is something that athletes, especially youth athletes, are exposed to on a day-to-day basis. So in this particular example, my question to you is perception of being in my kayak, having a nice row out in the sea, actually my reality when you look at what is actually behind you? So in this instance, a great white surfacing behind researcher Troy Snow's kayak in South Africa in 2003. I certainly know for myself, if that was the position that I was confronted with, I would have a level of stress that would be increasing stroke by stroke as I made my way towards the shore. Now, with stress, there are a lot of definitions around what actually is stress. But to put it simply, stress can be defined as any type of change that causes physical, emotional, or psychological strain. And we see this a lot, particularly within emerging athletes in their athletic development transition. I mentioned briefly earlier about my time at the Western Region Academy of Sport. And one of the papers I published out of RAS was a wellness monitoring tool for youth athletes. And it was very interesting to see in Unita's presentation the importance of the FTEM system approach, which was outlined. And this is a very important consideration, especially within the well-being of youth athletes. Because if we have a look at some of the stresses faced by youth athletes, these include training, competition, travel, and obviously study, all of which may have an accumulative impact on the youth athlete's stress fatigue state. Now, in surveying the athletes across a 10-year period at the academy, they reported a significant stressor was identified as parental. So along with their training, their competition, their travel, and their study schedule, there was a significant stressor, that being the parents. So we need to look at how important some of the psychological tools they have aid them in trying to reduce this noise and further quiet the inner critic. Now, surprisingly, with these pre-elite youth athletes, after identifying the stresses, we asked them, as an athlete, what is your most important attribute? Now, it may be to your surprise that less than 10% of pre-elite youth athletes identified mindset or their psychological makeup as an important attribute for their level of performance. This is extremely surprising, considering that 50 to 90% of successful athletic performance and victory against an opponent of equal physical abilities can depend on mental skills and psychological preparation. Which is a great segue when we look at and start to introduce this concept of mentality. So mentality, we're talking about your mentality will determine more than your skills. Now, this is a particular quote from a recent podcast by King and the Coach that featured the current 3-time NBL champion and 3-time NBL MVP player, Bryce Cotton. And of this mentality that he talks about, there is one key attribute which he felt defines athletes' mentality. And that key attribute is overall their behaviour. Now, with that in mind, behaviour is key to putting you in a position to be able to achieve what is required at one point in time. We're just going to take a moment and watch a very short clip on behaviour in elite sporting settings.
We gotta talk. We gotta talk. Fight yourself, Dom. Hey, watch it, Dom. Watch it. Over talk, man. Let's over talk. Over talk. I'm low, man. I'm low, man. We got tags. Tag out. I'm on now. My ball. I'm in. Hey, I got your help. I'm here. I'm low. In the gap. My ball. Hey, ball. I'm in the gap. Hey, I'm low, man. You good, Kimber? Kimber, go. Hey, oh, no. That's the talk, though. At that kick, yo, I'm going. Way to talk, fellas.
So as you can see there, the communication aspect is essential with any athlete and coach. But what we talk about now as we move forward from mentality and behaviour, quite often many organisations talk about team values. Now, in sports elite, we know that in order to make team values meaningful, they must be linked to behaviours. And these are what we call our non-negotiables. These are our conscious commitments that the members make. So it's not just about having a team value, but it's anchoring and attaching this to something tangible. Now, in this particular example, we're going to use commitment as the team value. And for commitment, we're going to look at aligning 4 particular behaviours that link to that particular team value. So in this instance, the non-negotiable behaviours are 1, be on time and ready to train and play every time. So a level of professionalism. 2, put in extra work after training. So for commitment, we have a level of deliberate practice. 3, preparation and recovery for training and games. So looking after the physical and mental preparation. And finally, number 4, hold each other accountable. So there's no excuses. So in this example, while we talk about a team value being commitment, we've now aligned specific non-negotiable behaviours that attach the players to their conscious commitments. And in this case, that is to enforce the behaviours that will allow them to exhibit this commitment value. Now, along those lines, I'd like to introduce you to a guy called Inky Johnson. Inky Johnson is quoted as saying we should look at the process, i.e. the behaviours, not the product, that is the result. And this all starts with commitment, i.e. the value we just looked at previously. Now, what Inky goes on to talk about is the fact that if we look at the psychological resilience pyramid, commitment leads to accountability, and accountability requires discipline. Discipline leads to execution, and it's execution that will lead to results. That is process over product. Achieving results is no mistake. It is a consequence of commitment, and that is why commitment is the foundation of the psychological resilience pyramid. Now, when we have a look at putting that all together from our mentality, through our behaviours, through communication, through your team values, we're just going to take a quick break and have a look at one more clip that puts that all together for us. Here is the perfect example of process over product. Two team members working at once, 1.2 second pit stop, all working on at the same point, doing their job, knowing their role. That then leads us through to, in working with thousands of athletes over the time, we've been able to gather feedback regarding what they consider to be the 1%ers that they feel most impactful on their performance for them. Now, ironically, when we did a thematic reduction of the 7 key 1%ers that were identified, the top 5 were psychological related strategies. So what we're going to look at now is how we can practically apply these top 4 strategies to help us quiet the inner critic within our youth athletes. The first one, goal setting. Now, I know Unita had mentioned this earlier on in the piece, and this is one of the first points of contact when we have with our athletes around have they actually set formalized goals. Now, this is really important because what we know is that there appears to be a lack of actionable steps that allow athletes to go through the process for goal achievement. Now, keep in mind, as humans, we process visually approximately 60,000 times faster than have an image based on looking at a particular verbal feedback. So if I can see something, it's going to be processed 60,000 times faster than any other means. So the importance of step number 1, which is writing down your goals, means that you can visually see them. This is an important point because when we see something, it affects how we act. And that goes back to our characteristics of behaviour earlier on. So the first point for our athletes is have them write down their goals. But that's not where the process stops. The second thing we need to do is, after having our goals written down, and by doing that alone, we're 43% more likely to achieve them. But the second step in that is I'm going to write them down, and then I'm going to write some actionable items or actionable outcomes that I want to, that are going to take me to help me achieve that goal. So I'll write down some actionable steps. And what are my commitments to achieving that goal? Now I've gone from 43% more likely to achieve the goal to about 62% more likely. Now, when we go from there, the third step is, after I've had my athletes write down their goals and then they've completed some actionable steps, our next thing is to share them. So I'm going to get them to increase the level of accountability by now handing that over to somebody else. So now they're going to be accountable to another player or a coach. By doing that, I've now increased my likelihood of achieving those written down goals from 62% to 76%. So as you can see, it's one thing just to say to goals, do you have goals? But they need to be written down. We need to write actionable steps to achieve them. And then we need to share them with somebody in order to create some accountability. So the effectiveness of actionable steps related to goal setting, writing down the goals, is the first point. Actionable steps for commitments is the second point. And accountability with sharing are keys to the goal setting process. The next area we're going to touch on is that of visualization. And I'll give you a basketball example. So in this particular example, we're looking at the two NBA basketballers with the highest career free throw shooting percentages of all time. So Steph Curry and Steve Nash. And they've both utilized visualization as a key component of mental rehearsal as part of their free throw shooting routine. So if you look at Curry at 90.4%, so that's 2,347 out of 2,500 shots, and Steve Nash at 90.43%, so 3,060 out of 3,384 shots. The value of visualization is an area that can produce improvements in long-term performance over time. The other area to that is we need to look at some of the reasons surrounding the practice of visualization. Now, through the use of visualization strategies, we've seen reductions in youth athlete performance anxiety by just having a few key steps that they can follow. And these can be things such as simply, learning to reproduce the skills more quickly, accurately, and smoothly. I can manage our expectations and limitations more effectively. Obviously, avoid repeating the same mistakes repeatedly. Maintain a presence of mind in high-pressure situations. Experience greater commitment and motivation to the task at hand. And ultimately, experience more confidence in outright abilities. So there are several reasons to look at engaging athletes within the practice of visualization. Now, we've utilised a visualization strategy plan with athletes from pre-elite youth all the way up through to senior. And we offer them a 7 steps to success process. And the idea being that the activity will help the athlete build their own visualization plan. And then we look at having the athlete implement this visualization plan over the next 28-day period, where they can start to employ visualization, which becomes a part of their everyday practice. Feedback from the athletes that had utilised the strategy have all reported significant reductions in performance anxiety traits. Okay, the next part we're going to look at is that of anchoring. Now, this is something that's not new. It's been used for some period of time. Most recently, it was in the news with St Kilda Football Club, where they spoke about this goal of the move within their performance department to look at above the shoulders strategy. So this was the connection between mindfulness and performance. The clip you're seeing here was part of their deep nasal breathing that they employed at quarter time periods within games. The idea was to reduce the noise, allow yourself a moment to reflect, bring yourself back to the here and now, becoming centered or anchored to the moment. Now, as I mentioned, anchoring is nothing new. It's heavily grounded in the area of aviation. Now, what they showed was they looked at surveying a series of pilots who had experienced a catastrophic event, i.e. they're flying the plane and they've had an event where it's resulted in the plane going into a crashing situation. What they're able to do was to have a look at first response of the pilot. And the the pilots they surveyed all said for that one moment in time, they utilised a strategy called a fixated gaze, where they looked and viewed the operations manual. They didn't touch it. They didn't pick it up. They just took a moment and looked at it. That was their anchor. They've read that manual 1,000 times. It's like the free throw example we showed you earlier. Those athletes will have taken 1,000 free throws. But the one shot in basketball, which is the only shot that is uncontested, is in some instances the hardest shot to make with some of these athletes. So for the pilots, they took a fixated gaze, brought them back to the here and now. Then they were able to go through the routine of doing what needed to be done to remain in control of the task at hand. We've mentioned along with this area of fixated gazing. Our whole area of anchoring techniques is that to practice being present at the same time. Now, we know it's hard to be locked in for athletes in a game situation for the entirety of the game. There's going to be ebbs and flows as they compete. What we would like to do is have them go through and utilise a routine that they feel comfortable with. And we've utilised this routine extensively in basketball, as when that players would go to the free throw line, they would close their eyes briefly. They would take 2 very purposeful, deep nasal breaths. The idea of trying to clear the mind and reduce their heart rate. They would open their eyes to bring them back to the present, to the here and now. They would then take a fixated gaze at a particular part. An example we will use would be the top right-hand corner of the backboard, so that they would achieve this quiet eye fixation for a moment, allowing them to reaffirm what they're going to do. Then they would go into whatever their pre-shooting routine would be. Now, as you can see there, this whole process takes no more than approximately 5 seconds. We've also used this in relation to when we have athletes in new environments to try and improve situational awareness. So once again, a basketball example would be is if we go to a new venue, we would have the athletes walk on court, they would find a spot, they would go through this particular routine, but the reaffirmation would be the skill they're trying to perform, getting to their spot for their shot, locking down a player in defense. And we would go through that positive reaffirmation within the period they had their eyes closed. We always finish off then with 2 claps to bring them back to the here and now, 2 toe taps on the court with their feet to reconnect to the environment, and then we would move on to another spot on court. Right. The next one to move on to is that of mindfulness. Now, mindfulness has become quite a key area that has been discussed in the media and the literature increasingly over the last few months. Now, if we look at mindfulness, we know that mindfulness will help to develop clarity, and which helps improve a team's ability to execute, its ability to change direction confidently in the present moment. It allows players to control emotional reactivity. And that is extremely important under the game-type pressures of the bright lights. Now, I did mention earlier that we had used some anchoring techniques for free throw shooting within professional basketballers. And I just want to do that for a second and talk about a particular single subject case study with a particular player in the National Basketball League. Now, this player was a two-time grand final MVP. Now, prior to implementing their anchoring techniques and us challenging the player to look at situational reframing, their free throw shooting percentage was at a 54%. After introducing these techniques, and a lot of credit must go to the player who ensured that they fully engaged in the process. And sometimes the process is not necessarily a good fit for every single player. But for this particular player, they immerse themselves in the process around anchoring techniques. And the result of that was a 37% increase in free throw shooting percentage. So now add that 37 to 54, you're now talking about a free throw shooting percentage of 91%. Now also, mindfulness is a key component of emotional wellness. And that's really a person's ability to cope with daily circumstances and the changes in those daily circumstances. It allows them to deal with personal feelings in a positive, optimistic, and constructive manner. Now, we've successfully used an app called Smiling Mind. So I strongly recommend you jump on there and have a look at that in your own time. There are multiple out there. We have no association with the Smiling Mind company. However, the athletes that we have utilised with this particular app, which does revolve around a series of mindfulness, meditation, reaffirmation strategies through audio, the feedback from the playing group has always been extremely positive, to the point where we use this as one of our primary strategies when we know we have lead-ups coming into extensive periods of time where there may be increases in stress. So I'd certainly recommend looking at the Smiling Mind. Now, the other area around mindfulness, which we've used and had a lot of success with our pre-elite youth athletes, is to really help this situation of sleep. Because you can look at a significant amount of literature at the moment will show you the interactions between sleep quality, sleep quantity, and the impact on injury. So quite often, our mindfulness work with some of our athletes will be one part of what we would establish for their pre-sleep routine. Now, what we do know is youth athletes that have said to us they have issues sleeping quite often. It'll be, okay, it's time to go to bed, so now I'm just going to hop into bed. However, that hasn't established a pre-sleep routine that is going to allow them to have the most conducive sleep environment. So for us, we would look at utilising mindfulness as part of our pre-sleep routine. Now, how are we going to apply mindfulness in the situation for particular athletes? There are really 4 key areas that we use for mindfulness, and that is, how can I achieve or help the athlete achieve a calmness in which they're in the moment, they're on their game. This is complete situational awareness, situational control to achieve what we'd like to be performance flow. Now, when you think of performance flow and you think of athletes, the best of the best, the greatest of all time, so the GOATs within the different fields or the different sports, the one common trait that they display during competition is this luxury of time. They appear to be in slow motion. And a lot of that deals with their ability to control their negative reactions and negative responsiveness to different situations. So the 4 things we look at with our athletes: 1, our goal is to achieve performance flow. So this is clarity, situational awareness, which will help us achieve accurate execution. We want the athlete to be clear and want them to be able to adapt and overcome in the environmental situation that is sport. In order to do that, we really get them to focus on reducing their attentional field. So we want to control that attentional field, filter out the noise. And this will allow them to control their emotional reactiveness. Because it's these emotional reactions we find players get lost in the noise of those emotions. So our primary goal is to help the athlete manage that emotional reactiveness. And this can help us to lead to what we would call blue flow state, or this performance flow state. And then when we get there, that's when the athletes tell us that they achieve this deep calmness and flow. And a repeated theme from that is they have this level of high clarity on task and this increased situational awareness. So what we try and achieve with the athletes along the goal of mindfulness is to get them to the point where we can reduce the noise. That is our primary target. And there is a ways we look at doing that through performance flow, attentional field, reducing emotional reactiveness, and then putting them in a blue mind state for high clarity on task. So to put that all together, what practically can we take away for you guys to be able to work with your athletes in one of these particular areas? Because as I mentioned at the beginning, our primary goal was to provide you with some strategies where we can quiet the inner critic. Because we know this active judgment ignites this critic, especially in pre-elite youth athletes. And this leads to these emotional reactions. So the strategies we've gone over today are to help athletes avoid attaching these emotions related to the overall performance outcome. So we want to take them back to the process, not the product. This whole area allows them to control these negative emotional reactions. Being relaxed not only allows the player to play better, or the athlete to play better, but allows them to feel better. Now, for us, it's really about avoiding attaching these emotional reactions, having the athletes maintain a relaxed focus. And we've discussed 4 particular ways we can use different psychological strategies to assist us in quieting the inner critic. Now, especially during intensified training and competition periods, we know that this inner critic can creep up across a multitude of athletes, especially in significant camp considerations. So I just want you to consider what we discussed so far as we watch one last clip from Basketball New Zealand with their women's senior team at training camp in preparation for the Asia Cup.
There's full empathy for the fact that we're 80% of the way through the camp, 2-a-days, tired bodies. So what this replicates is end of a tournament and how we feel, and everyone's tired, but the team that executes wins. The team that gives way to fatigue is not going to.
Now, the reason for I show you that particular clip, we had 4 of those particular athletes were youth athletes, their first time being part of the National Senior Women's Camp. So their transition through the junior pathway into the senior pathway, and we employed all 4 strategies with those particular athletes during that particular camp. So our key points, we've addressed several key areas related to psychological strategies for success in youth athletes, particularly talking around what strategies can we utilise in order to quiet the inner critic. So reflecting in the context of your environment, the athletes that you work with, I want you to consider what would you use as your big rocks that you can implement to assist youth athletes in your particular program. And once again, those big rocks that we've touched on today revolved around goal setting, visualization, anchoring, and mindfulness. So I just want to thank you for your attention and happy to take any questions as we need to moving forward.